Okay, what would your position be on if I were to ask you, is January 6th? January
What the fuck? Did you
6th
just go blah, 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 blah?
I'm at, yeah.
Blah, 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 blah.
Sup YouTube? Yeah, so Destiny's had this debate with Andrew Wilson on the topic of January 6th and whether the events that took place that day constituted an insurrection or not. I've watched the debate and let's say neither side came out unscathed. But let's start with the beginning.
The events of January 6th were a protest that turned into a riot.
An insurrection includes 4 vital elements. 1 is an assemblage, meaning a group of people that have come together. 2 is resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. 3 is you have to do this by way of force or intimidation. And 4 is it has to be through for a public concern or a public cause, not a private thing that one might be interested in.
Okay, so the ground is set. As you can see, Andrew believes that the J6 events constituted a riot, whereas Destiny believes it was an insurrection. Or, since this will come up during the debate, Destiny is convinced that the J6 events were an insurrection, whereas Andrew is not. Before looking at Destiny's failed debate tactics, let's look at Andrew's because the list is shorter for him.
Destiny comes through and he gives us this list. He says 1, an assemblage. Okay. 2, resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. Okay. 3, by force or intimidation. Okay. 4, for a public purpose. He has just outlined basically almost every single political riot I've ever heard of. How in the world can he say essentially almost any riot on planet Earth or any assemblage, even a peaceful protest where they shut down the roads, is an insurrection? That can't be true.
Okay, so this is a minor point, but it's kind of an omen for Andrew's argumentative tactics later on in the debate, so I needed to point it out. Andrew used the word peaceful here in an attempt to ridicule Destiny's definition, seemingly not caring about Destiny's third point, which basically eliminates peaceful protests or gatherings. There's nothing violent or intimidating about these knuckleheads unless you're intimidated by their violent stupidity.
Wait a second. Your definition here seems to be more about rioting than anything else by your own claim. An assemblage would fit a riot, says Destiny. That's his first claim. Resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. It wouldn't fit rioting itself, says Destiny, even though rioting itself is against the law. What do you mean?
This is the first time, I think, during the debate that they're actually discussing the difference between resisting a law and breaking a law. These two concepts are not the same.
Breaking a law and resisting law are not the same thing.
Resisting a law means aiming to have the law changed or cancelled. It means to oppose a law. So the assemblage in question is there with the specific purpose to oppose a specific law or laws. Those who riot do not resist the law against rioting, they're breaking it. So resisting and breaking a law are different. I would have given Andrew a pass on this one because it's not necessarily a fallacy to mistakenly misrepresent your opponent's worldview, but it becomes one when you do it intentionally, as Andrew does throughout the debate past this point.
He said resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding wouldn't fit rioting. Yes, it does fit rioting. It fits rioting better than anything else I can think of. Yes, you are immediately, upon rioting, resisting the law.
And it's called a straw man. What Andrew is doing here is using the term resisting a law with its colloquial sense of doing something that goes against the law, whereas the notion actually has a specific definition in law, and it's a problem when your opponent clearly explains the difference between these two concepts multiple times and you simply refuse to adjust. Basically, this is what Andrews is doing throughout the debate, conflate the notion of resisting a law with that of breaking a law, so he can say that Destiny's definition of an insurrection also applies to a riot, which is a sign of intellectual dishonesty. I would have preferred him acknowledging the difference between the two concepts, but then argue the vagueness of the concept of resisting a law. Like, when can you tell that the people participating in the supposed insurrection are actually there to resist a specific law? How can you prove their intent beyond a reasonable doubt? Also, how many people are supposed to have that goal to qualify the event as a whole as an insurrection? Is 10% of the people enough? Is 50%? But Andrew chose a different route, and so he gets a slap on the wrist. Now let's move on to Destiny, because there's a lot more shit on his shoe.
So there's two parts to the insurrection, two elements that I don't think would fit. So the first one is an assemblage. That would clearly fit a riot, I think, but it would fit a riot and it would fit an insurrection. The second part is resisting a particular law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. There are plenty of riots that aren't riots to resist like the implementation of a law or to interfere necessarily with like some government proceeding. And then the third one is the third element by force or intimidation. I would say that riots generally have a forceful or intimidating aspect to them, although they generally happen spontaneously. Usually they're not planned in advance. To quote Justice Greer, quote, legal authorities carefully distinguished planned insurrections from spontaneous riots.
So let's be clear, Destiny's just added a new requirement to his definition of an insurrection. I don't see the requirement of planning or premeditation here. As your definition stands, insurrections can be both planned and spontaneous. And you could say that this is just me being picky, but when the discussion is about the very thin delineation between two very similar concepts based on a clear-cut definition, adding additional differences like these on the fly that are not in the definition is kinda shady, because it gives me the message, okay, I don't really like the fact that this definition applies to both situations, so let me come up with an additional feature that I didn't mention anywhere so that the definition no longer applies to both situations. And if the stance is, well, it was rather implicit that planning is part of an insurrection, it may well have been, but you didn't state that clearly as a necessary condition in your definition, which means that Andrew would have been in the right to reject it. You can't have a law where the very elements necessary to define a law and that can make the difference between someone walking free and going to jail are left out because they are implicit. Also, let's not forget about this.
There's tons of people that can riot that aren't rioting with the goal of resisting the implementation of a particular law or trying to interfere with the course of some government proceeding. So the part two, the second element I've listed, really wouldn't comport with most riots.
Interesting choice of words here. And by interesting, I mean very poor. Because when you say that it wouldn't comport with most riots, you're actually saying that it comports with some. And that's all we need to prove that that second point applies to both insurrections and riots, which means you're making Andrew's point for him. Now, the next segment is interesting because they're arguing over whether Trump actually incited to insurrection or not. Let's see how that goes.
If somebody were to make the call and say, hey guys, we're all going to show up to go and blow this building up, and a bunch of people showed up, and then a bunch of them marched with the crowd, and then they all went and a building got blown up, we wouldn't say like, oh, well, we don't know what the intention of the crowd was. We don't know what the intention of the leader there was.
So when you're talking about this from a logical standpoint, when you say, oh, if somebody called and said, hey, we're all going to blow this building up, yes, I would agree that you could probably ascribe the motivation to it then. Can you show me a tweet or any type of anything from Donald Trump saying, hey guys, show up, we're going to do an insurrection? No, you just made the shit up.
Okay, fine. So I can. So as part of Donald Trump's speech, I'll give you two quotes. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore. And that's what this is all about. And to use a favorite term that all you people really came up with, we will stop the steal. Today, I will lay out just some of the evidence proving that we won this election. We won it by a landslide. This was not a close election. The first quote. The second quote, we must stop the steal. And then we must ensure that such outrageous election fraud never happens again, can never be allowed to happen again. When he says stop the steal, when they're at the Capitol building on January 6th, and when the election is being certified, what does stop the steal mean there?
Wait a second. So first of all, you're attributing to Donald Trump's rhetoric here something which he may not have intended. None of that actually shows or demonstrates that he was calling for an insurrection on the Capitol. You are just kind of ascribing that motivation onto it for the purposes of convenience.
Yes, Andrew is correct here. The two situations aren't analogous because in Destiny's example, the people's intention is clear and expressly stated. In the case of Donald Trump's speech, his intention needs to be deduced. It's not as clear and expressly stated as it is in the first case. Sure, you could argue that Trump was calling for an insurrection and that would be a common sense interpretation of his words. I can get that argument. But you can't use the "come on bro, we all know what he meant" as evidence in court to charge Trump with insurrection, can you? Which is why Andrew is correct in rejecting this point.
Okay, so then just to be clear then, just so we're all, so the prompt for the debate was January 6th an insurrection, and I came in with a positive and you came in with no position.
No, it wasn't no position. It was that it's possible that it was,
That's how I
possible
see
that
it.
it wasn't.
That's no
and
position.
I was willing to hear you. No, it's a neutral position. That's not no position.
That's
Neutral
no
is a
position.
position.
If somebody's looking, okay.
I'm sorry, is neutral not a position?
Not really, no.
Oh, no, not really. Does that mean no or yes, Destiny? Is neutral a position or isn't it?
Faith
For the
decision.
purposes of having a debate, no.
Oh, for the purposes of having a debate, you can't have a neutral position. Destiny,
If somebody
Stephen
hosted a
Bonnell
debate-
III, the best leftist debater on planet
Yeah.
Earth, ladies and gentlemen. Neutral on a debate topic is
Yep.
not a position.
Not to have as a debater. That's correct. If there's a debate saying,
honest
is
with
God
you, it's a
real?
very
And one person
forward
shows up and says,
position. It's
I'm
not
arguing
a
the
very
affirmative, God is real. And the other person
entertaining
says, I'm a neutral position on that.
That's right, Destiny. That would be called an atheist. That's how all debates on the existence of God work. The atheist holds the neutral position of I do not believe A,
The position that God exists.
and I do not believe B,
The position that God doesn't exist.
because none have been proven to be true. The debate will then only address A, aka the theist claims that he believes God exists and takes on the burden of proof to convince the atheist. Basically, Destiny and Andrew are both looking at a jar of gumballs, and Destiny claims that the number of gumballs is odd. And because Andrew rejected his point that the number is odd, then Andrew must say that he believes the number of gumballs is even, which is an idiotic take. Maybe Andrew isn't convinced that the number is either even or odd. You say it's odd, you prove it's odd. Andrew doesn't need to say or do shit. To transfer this to the subject of the debate, Andrew is simply not convinced that J6 was an insurrection. He's literally holding the atheist's position, which he almost expressly stated during his response.
It's possible that it was,
That's how I
possible
see
that
it.
it wasn't.
This isn't difficult, Destiny.
Trump is a bad president because he led an insurrection, then Kamala Harris directly provided aid and support to insurrectionists. So wouldn't this also make Kamala Harris an insurrectionist?
No, because I don't think any court has reviewed any of that behavior and found any of it to be an insurrection.
Nobody has been prosecuted for any insurrection by any definition.
Whether or not somebody is charged with an insurrection, again, has nothing to do with the event itself.
Yeah, so according to Destiny, this argument is wrong when Andrew uses it, but right when he does. Fortunately, Andrew picked up on the problem immediately.
Whoa, 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 whoa. No court has said that this is an insurrection either.
So, move along, I guess.
I got a question for Destiny, and I think Andrew can pick up afterwards. So, based off of your 4 points that you gave for what would make an insurrection, technically, none of your points make it necessary for there to be violence. You say in point 3, force or intimidation, but it doesn't necessarily have to be violence. So, based off of that, wouldn't any legal protest where you're advocating for a certain political cause or anything like that in a public space, wouldn't that also, by your definition, count as an insurrection?
No, because I think that the intimidation part is important. The quote that I borrowed from here was from Justice Marshall in 1807. He said, quote, "The most comprehensive definition of levying war against the king or against the United States, which I have seen, requires an assemblage of men ready to act and with an intent to do some treasonable act and armed in warlike manner, or else assembled in such numbers as to supersede the necessity of arms."
Yeah, and what are those numbers? This sounds like highly subjective to me. Supersede the necessity of which arms? Small arms? How many? How about tanks? What's the rioters per arms ratio that would turn the riot into an insurrection? These sound like important questions to me because if you can't answer how many is too many, you cannot definitively ascribe the intimidation factor to any gathering of people. And you can say, but atypical, Destiny's definition of insurrection has 4 requirements. Just because there's no violence and you cannot prove the intimidation part doesn't mean that the other 3 requirements don't stand, which of course they do. But Destiny presented his definition with 4 requirements, which means you need to prove all 4 to prove the insurrection. If your definition has 4 requirements but 1 is optional, well then in reality your definition has 3 requirements. And it doesn't seem like that's the case because neither of Destiny's 4 requirements is optional, which makes it problematic when one of the requirements is so blurry and vague that you can't even define it.
So that's not bad faith for me to do an internal critique in your definition when I can at least take your definition and say, wait a second, all of these apply to a different category.
You're critiquing my definition without even having a definition
I
of your own.
don't need to have a definition
You
to
do.
critique yours. That's absurd. That's illogical and absurd.
The debate was over whether or not January 6th was an insurrection. If you only came to that debate to critique my position, and I shouldn't even let you get away with this. You said earlier that you were neutral on it. You're not neutral on it. The answer for you is you can't compute the question. It's undefined. You don't have a neutral position. If you don't have a definition of insurrection, you can't possibly take a position. It's like dividing by zero. The answer is not neutral or nothing.
Again,
you just have an undefined position.
I know you don't
even
like
have a
this.
definition of a term. What would your position be on if I were to ask you, is January 6th...
Did you just go blah, 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 blah?
I'm at, yeah. If it's
Why?
I ask you, was January 6th a... What's your answer to that? Would you say you're neutral on that?
Well, that would be incoherent. I wouldn't even understand what you're saying.
Thank you. I agree. Yes.
I'm not sure Destiny achieved what he thought he achieved here, and it's fairly easy to see why. Here, this is Destiny's concept of insurrection, as presented by Destiny himself, and this is the blah 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 concept. I'll give you 30 minutes to spot the difference. Okay, time's up. The difference is that the concept of insurrection is defined right here. This is the definition of the concept. The blah 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 concept doesn't have a definition, so it's understandable why Andrew would call it incoherent. And Andrew isn't critiquing the concept of insurrection, but its definition. It would make no sense to criticize a concept you have no definition of, but Andrew does. Look, it's right here. This is your definition. And Andrew doesn't need to provide a definition of his own because it's not his definition that's under scrutiny, it's yours. Like, let's say Destiny would have defined his blah 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 concept as an omnivorous four-legged animal with fur that barks and humans have adopted as pet. Andrew can say, wait a minute, your definition would better fit a dog. Why are we calling it a blah 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 if we already have a different concept, the dog, which fits that definition already? He doesn't have to have a separate definition for blah 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 to critique your definition. Destiny is simply unable to grasp this simple point. This is where we're at. So, to give you my thoughts on the debate, I think Destiny lost for two reasons. The first is that you could even agree that J6 was an insurrection according to Destiny's definition, but that same definition will include a variety of other events that we don't look at as insurrections. Andrew mentioned BLM protests during the debate, and even hippies protesting in favor of legalizing weed and gathering in such numbers that would supersede the necessity of arms, whatever the f that means. And all this comes from the vagueness of Destiny's 4 points, which Andrew correctly pointed out during the debate. The second problem is that this definition appears to be Destiny's definition, so I could give Destiny his point and accept that J6 was an insurrection according to his definition, but
what the hell do I care about your definition?
Before everything else, Destiny's job should be to show that his definition of insurrection is the correct one and should be used by the Supreme Court, that there is no better definition of insurrection, and he's failed to do that. Hell, he didn't even touch on this point. So, in my opinion, Destiny lost the debate, and I don't think Andrew did anything special to defeat him. I think Andrew could have presented the following argument and still win. So yeah, that's about it. Definitely go watch the debate yourself. I found it quite entertaining, to be honest. And come back and tell me what you think. And if you're at it, subscribe.
Whoa. No court has said that this is an insurrection either.
That's not true. The Colorado State Supreme Court did.
As someone who's researched this so heavily and talks about this case often as, oh, well, there was a case where they ruled this was insurrection. There was the New Mexico case and there was the Colorado case. You didn't even read the court decision, man. You didn't even
I literally
read it.
told you like 20 times that they use a three-pronged thing for their decision of insurrection in this case. How many times did you not?
So you did read it before. That's what you're saying.
A long time ago, yes.
Okay.
Or at the very least, an executive summary. I'm pretty sure I read the case, yes.
You read it before, but you were unaware that they specifically said we're not giving an actual definition of the term insurrection.
The way that you're phrasing this is not accurate. What did they say, Rob? Are you even capable of phrasing what they said?
Yes, I've done it like 5 times. Are you
Phrase it.
capable of
Phrase
hearing
what
me?
they said. Phrase
Right.
what they said.
There is a lot of varying definitions of the term insurrection, but we're not going to settle on one actual definition of insurrection because we think that whatever definition of insurrection we would use, January 6th meets it.
There you go. Correct.
Wow. No, you want me to say? Now, this is very indicative of the style of debate that you do. It's why you want to have debates on the definition of insurrection.